Good morning, Austin Graff. Welcome on VH Berries.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's about 8 a.m. in Washington, D.C. Austin Graff is very productive and he has already had the time to do a morning run along the National Mall, take his daughter to school, read all newspaper, fish marlin in the Potomac River, and also to repaint all the walls of his house.
It's very true, and I've also had the time to rearrange my bookshelf behind me. Very productive morning.
So your articles in the Washington Post are part of the By the Way section, and the motto is detours with locals, travel tips you can trust.
That's correct. Yeah, so my main job at the Washington Post, I'm lucky to have a main job that's on the business side. So I lead what's called talent marketing and brand at the Washington Post. So my team considers ourselves to be the reporters covering life within the Washington Post. So more people join our company as we grow, which we are growing our company to be its biggest size ever in the history of the Washington Post. And then I've also had the opportunity to write for By the Way, which is, we launched that in June of 2019. Which was a new travel vertical written by locals for people who want to experience off the beaten path places in the cities that they travel to. So I'm one of their contributing writers, and I'm the Washington, D.C. local guide and often cover the interesting things to do in every part of the city.
Absolutely, because you are a locals. You have lived in Washington, D.C. Since 2007, it's nearly 14 years.
That's correct. So Washington, D.C. is a very interesting place. Some people, when they move to D.C., they say that no one's from D.C., but that couldn't be more wrong. There are native Washingtonians who are born and raised in this city, and we are a historically black city and a majority black city, which we're very proud of. And then you have another population of people who move to DC, whether that's for a new job or to study at graduate school. They move here for a purpose, and I'm within that bucket. And I moved for an internship for a nonprofit that's fighting modern day slavery and human trafficking of kids in 2007, and just fell in love with the city and stayed. And so I have been here for a long time compared to many other transplants, but I am very proud to live near native Washingtonians who were born and raised in the same house and are still living there and who know this city better than I ever could.
Austin Graff, you just mentioned your passion for these Washington, D.C. cities. What do you find so special about it?
That's a good question. So a little bit of a backstory about myself. So I am what's called a third culture kid. And this concept means that my passport is from one country, but I grew up in a different country than my passport country. So my parents are American, and I was born in the United States. And then when I was little, my parents moved to the most central part of Russia, to a place called Tatarstan, which is the most Muslim part of Russia and one of the most independent republics of Russia. And that's where I was raised. And in addition to that, I went to boarding school in Germany, in southwest Germany, on the border of Switzerland, Germany, and France, in the Black Forest region of Germany, and then came to the United States for university. And so one thing I love about DC is that it's very international. It's a bigger city. We have around 7 million people in the whole area, but we can't have big buildings within the city of Washington, D.C., so it feels a lot more small. Despite that, we have so many embassies from around the world that bring people from literally almost every country to DC. And with that, you have good restaurants with cuisine from all around the world, things to explore. You have a French influence on the city in terms of architecture. I learn something every single day by going out and exploring, especially during the pandemic.
And in addition to Russia and Germany, you also have been in Kazakhstan, in China, for example.
That's correct. So when I was in high school, my parents relocated to Kazakhstan and lived there for a number of years in Almaty, which is considered their business capital. Beautiful city in the mountains. and it's very green, a lot of natural beauty. And so I would often visit them throughout the years. And it reminded me a lot of where I grew up in Tatarstan in terms of the type of people that live there, just very friendly, great food, this community feel. And then in college, I studied in Beijing, China, and would travel all around the country, and then spend some time in Kenya on a project as well. But I'm grateful because my parents' jobs brought us overseas into so many different countries, all growing up, that I've been to just over 70 countries. And there's not a single country I don't want to go to. So hopefully I will hit every single one of them before my life is up.
This is very inspiring, Austin Graff, because I find that in everything you do, the key of your success is to stay very curious.
That's very true. And I do think that is an important life lesson, is to stay curious, because it makes, one, it puts the center spotlight on someone else, and you just learn so much. And so you get a lot in return as well. And it's actually a key component of journalism, and which, not just in our newsroom, but throughout every department, we ask questions. We try to get to the root of a problem. We try to shed truth on systemic problems. And that really it starts with being curious, to ask questions over and over again and just listen and learn from people. And in the same way, I explore, where when I go into a neighborhood or go to a new city, you can do all the research beforehand and even while you're on the ground, but it's so important to ask locals questions about what their favorite places to go are, or the issues their community is facing, and how people feel about that, or how could someone help from the outside if they could help at all. And so it really does start with questions, and you just learn so much that you can then make connections and apply to every part of your life, from personal to professional.
I'm very curious because by taking a deeper look on your work, I find that you also like to put your personality into your work. For instance, you are using your personal life to illustrate and portray your philosophy of exploring. For example, this is logical because when you're recommending restaurants, this means that you enjoyed it yourself.
That's correct. So in addition to being the DC guide for By the Way, I have for years and years have always been a very active, it's called a Google local guide. So writing reviews on Google Maps, and I also write them on Yelp. And that means I go out and experience different restaurants, and will write what I enjoy, and will shed light on some things that I personally did not appreciate, with the hope that it will be a resource for someone else. And then I also do that in my writing as well. So a recent article I wrote was about how I taught my toddler the alphabet by exploring different neighborhoods throughout DC, beginning with the letter of the alphabet. And I wrote that as a very personal story, hoping that it would inspire others to kind of see the pandemic and being stuck at home, juggling homeschooling as well as full-time work for many people in the Washington, D.C. area, as inspiration to go outside safely and just to get to know their region. And since the pandemic lasted for a long time, we went from A to Z, so 26 letters, exploring different neighborhoods throughout DC. And then when we were done with that, we decided to take the same approach and explore the suburbs of DC. And as the pandemic dragged on and we finished the alphabet in the suburbs, we went from A to Z, exploring off the beaten path spots in the area. And then after that, we explored within a 4-mile radius of our house in the southeast part of Washington, D.C. And it was really fun to kind of learn alongside each other. And I learned so much about every neighborhood, about every suburb, about every place that we explored beforehand, so that I could explain it to her in a way that a kid could understand. And that did end up inspiring other people to go out and go to every park in this area, and every trail, and every safe outdoor spot. And it made me appreciate where I live so much more.
This is funny you bring this up. Now I know that every time I click on the Google review of a place, there is Austin Graff everywhere.
It's very true. My neighbors and friends joke. Even yesterday, our next door neighbor, we were talking outside as she was walking her dog, and she said, "Austin, you are everywhere." They were going to a random restaurant miles and miles away from Washington, D.C., and they pulled it up on Google Maps, and the first review they saw was mine. They're like, "Wait, that's our neighbor, Austin Graff. He's been to this very small random spot, like 25 miles from Washington, D.C." So we often laugh about it.
And are you the type of person who only rates 5 stars and only places that you enjoyed, or are you tough sometimes?
I am the type of person that I can be tough sometimes because I really see it as kind of a public service to help people understand where they are about to dine or visit. And in my real life, I try to be a friendly person. And so I think most of my reviews skew on the 4-star rating. It's hard to get a 5 because that means there's nothing you can improve upon. So a lot of my reviews are 4. But there are some 2s and 1s in there if it was just a very negative experience. And I struggle with that because behind these reviews are business owners who are really just trying to make it work and who have put their dreams and their life savings into this venture they're trying to start. But if they see these reviews as going back to being curious, it should lead them to ask questions so that they are better. So I really see even the more negative reviews as a service to really refine your business so that the masses will enjoy it, so your dream can continue.
And Austin Graff, you just said that to teach the alphabet to your daughter, you went to place from A to Z, but I guess that at the end of the alphabet, there are more rare places, for example, with Epsilon or Z.
Yes, you're right. And so that was an original challenge. So it was very easy at the upfront of the English alphabet. But then when we got to X and Y and Z, it was much harder. And so what we did for that was we went to a street that begins with that letter in a neighborhood that we hadn't been to before. And then we would explore that specific street and then use that as an excuse to explore the entire neighborhood. So for example, for Z, there is no neighborhood that starts with a Z in Washington, D.C., and there's only one place that starts with a Z, and that's an alley. And it's a historic alley, truly 2 blocks from the Washington Post, that has a rich history. And so what we did was we explored that alley and all the historic gems within this cobblestone alley, and then explored downtown D.C., close to the Washington Post.
And I have to admit that you are not helping this problem, because if one day there is a street called Austin Graff, it will be A, you know?
That's true. And there are so many neighborhoods that begin with A. So I'll just throw that into the mix too. Though I will say a fun fact about DC, there is an Austin Road in Washington, DC, and it's close to where I live in Southeast DC.
And what I found super fascinating about your work is that you use your phone as your only tools. For example, right now, you're filming this conversation with your phone.
Yes, I'm filming this conversation with my phone. I use an iPhone. I'm really grateful for smartphones, and the camera built into most smartphones is actually good quality. And so I am kind of a minimalist, so I don't like having a lot of equipment with me. And so I shoot entirely on my phone, which is a fun challenge to kind of, how can I take my phone to see a place in a different perspective from a different angle, and then do some editing on the back end just natively through the camera and photo app built into the smartphone. And many of my photos have appeared alongside the articles that I write within the Washington Post.
And I also noticed that you are collaborating with a photographer called Melina Mara. She is credited as the photographer on most of your articles.
Yes, yep, that's true. So the Washington Post, being a large, now international media company, we have a lot of different teams and a very large team that just focuses on photography. And they go out into assignment, and oftentimes we'll collaborate with writers to kind of bring the story to life.
And Austin Graff, personally, I haven't been to Washington, D.C. for the moment yet. What would you recommend me to visit? I want expert advice.
Oh, I can hopefully give you expert advice, and you should definitely come. We would love to have you. During the pandemic, we have fewer visitors, and rightfully so. We've asked people not to visit just to try to keep the locals safe in Washington, D.C. But after that, please come and try to... So I always advise, and I write about this in my writing, I try to take a 20-80 approach, where 20% of your time here, you should hit the National Mall and all the famous landmarks like the White House or the US Capitol or the Lincoln Memorial or some of our more famous museums, because they are beautiful and locals do go to them. Like for one of my normal runs is to the Lincoln Memorial, which is a very popular tourist destination, but a lot of locals run there, and we'll go to the back of the memorial where a lot of people don't go to and reflect and rest. It's truly a local spot. But so spend 20% of your time there, and then 80% of your time in the neighborhoods and in the alleys and going to off the beaten path museums. We have so many museums here, many of them that are small and more local museums that are worth your time, art galleries. But one of my favorite places to go is the US National Arboretum, which is a large green space with gardens. There's a bonsai garden that's there that is more people are writing about. And within the Arboretum and the trails, there are 3 different spots where you can see the old US Capitol columns before they renovated the building. And it really makes you feel like you're in Athens, Greece, rather than Washington, D.C. And it's a place where locals picnic at, it's where they gather, it's where they hang out, it's where they hike and they run. And it's in a neighborhood with some really good restaurants that are very much off the beaten path. Like this one place called Deli City, which has a really good sandwich. They don't take credit cards because they've been around for decades and they can't be bothered with that. It's cash only, but that's how you know that it's really good.
An idea just came in my mind. Do you plan to write a sort of book and guide?
Many people over the years have asked me to do that. People have expressed interest to do what's called a coffee table book, where I take photos that I've taken and then write about the place. So maybe one day. Right now, I am assuming just my mother would read that and buy that. But if more people would be interested, I might try to pursue that and maybe just sell it locally or online for people who want.
Let's see. Thank you so much, Austin Graff.
Thank you so much for having me. And again, I think, especially through this podcast, you really embody the curiosity aspect that we talked about how you get to know people's stories and ask questions. So keep it up, and thanks so much for having me.